The desert woke before the sun, and the land breathed slow and patient. Red dust lifted as hooves crossed the plain, and a lone rancher rode with his eyes low. He had learned to read the ground like a book of signs. Tracks meant story and silence meant warning. The wind carried a memory of songs older than fences. He followed the call toward the broken hills where stone met sky. There he saw her standing tall against the morning. She was called giant by fear, but she was simply strong. An Apache woman with calm eyes and a steady breath. She held a staff carved with lines of river and mountain. The rancher stopped and lifted his hands in peace. He had crossed lines before and learned respect the hard way. The woman spoke of hunger and loss and the need to stand. She told of children walking far for water and elders guarding fire. The rancher listened and felt the weight of his choices. He owned land, but the land did not belong to him. He remembered his mother, saying strength grows where mercy lives. The Apache woman asked for help without begging. She asked for seeds, tools, and safe passage for her people. The unthinkable choice rose in his chest like a storm, to open his wells to share his grain and to face anger. Neighbors would call him foolish and worse. Yet the land seemed to wait for his answer. He nodded and set his horse aside. He offered work and water and protection under open sky. The woman watched him and smiled not with teeth, but with trust. She spoke a blessing of shared roads and shared harvest. The day warmed and the pact was made by action. They walked together toward the ranch and the river. The path was long and the sun climbed higher. Along the way he promised fair trade and fair pay. She answered with stories of seasons and survival. They spoke of wounds that heal when hands join. At the ranch gates the workers paused and watched. The rancher spoke clear and steady about respect. He set rules of peace and shared labor. Some men frowned, but none challenged his voice. The Apache woman met each gaze without fear. She began to teach planting near the river bend. Children laughed as water filled the channels. Elders rested in shade and told old wisdom. The rancher felt the land soften under care. At dusk fires glowed and songs rose gentle. No fence could stop the night breeze. The woman thanked him with a nod. She said tomorrow would test their vow. He agreed and stood ready. Stars appeared and watched over new beginnings. Sleep came light, but hopeful. The land kept the promise of dawn. Morning would bring hard work and harder choices. Yet hearts were aligned like furrows. The rancher prayed for courage and fairness. The Apache woman prayed for safety and unity. Their prayers met in the open air. This was the first step of a long road. Hope walked with them. Tools were gathered and plans were shared. Trust grew with every honest act. Fear loosened its grip. The story had begun. Beyond the hills challenges waited. But so did strength. Together they would meet it. Hands to soil, minds to peace. The West listened. History shifted with quiet steps. Kindness marked the trail. Daylight promised growth. Night promised rest. This beginning mattered. It would echo across seasons and lives, rooted in shared ground and shared purpose for all people. Morning arrived with pale light and cool air. The ranch stirred slow as people rose to work. The Apache woman stood early by the river. She tested the soil with her hands. The rancher joined her carrying tools and seed. They spoke of water paths and shade. Work began without orders. Trust moved faster than fear. Men dug channels while women set markers. Children learned to carry water without spilling. Elders watched and corrected gently. The land answered with darkened earth. By midday clouds gathered thin and high. A neighbor rode in with a tight jaw. He warned of anger brewing down the road. Talk of theft, talk of trespass. The rancher thanked him and kept working. The Apache woman lifted her chin. She said, peace needs patience. She said courage must be shown by calm. The neighbor left shaking his head. Work continued steady and quiet. Songs rose soft like breathing. Seeds went into ground with care. Each seed held a promise. The rancher felt the weight of eyes. He knew whispers would follow. He chose to face them with truth. Later a group arrived at the gate. Ranch hands from nearby lands. They accused and shouted. The rancher stepped forward alone. He spoke of shared water, shared work. He spoke of fair trade and law. He spoke of human dignity. The Apache woman stood beside him. Her presence was strong like stone. She spoke of treaties broken. She spoke of survival and respect. The crowd wavered uncertain. Some lowered their gaze. Others left muttering threats. No blow was struck. The day passed with tension and resolve. Toward evening, rain finally fell. Light rain that kissed the dust. The channels filled and flowed. Children laughed and ran. The rancher closed his eyes. He felt relief like cool shade. The Apache woman smiled openly now. She said the land remembers kindness. At supper, fires glowed again. Food was shared equally. Stories were traded like gifts. The rancher told of his father, a man who lost much and learned mercy. The Apache woman told of a grandmother, a woman who carried seeds through exile. Listening bound them closer. Night brought stars bright and near. Guards kept watch without fear. No raid came, only wind and owl calls. The rancher lay awake thinking. He knew tomorrow would test him harder. At dawn, smoke appeared far west. Riders moved fast toward the river. Alarm spread, but panic did not. The Apache woman gathered her people. She spoke clear and firm. No weapons raised first. The rancher mounted his horse. He rode to meet the riders. They were hired men stirred by lies. He spoke again of peace. Some turned away. One refused and reached for steel. The Apache woman stepped forward. She raised her hand. Her voice carried strength. She said blood would poison the water. She said walk away and live. The man hesitated, then left. The others followed. Silence returned heavy, then light. The crisis passed like a storm edge. The rancher exhaled slow. He thanked her with a nod. She answered with respect. Work resumed stronger than before. By afternoon, shoots showed green. Small but certain. Hope stood visible. The rancher called everyone together. He set a council of voices. Apache and ranch alike. Decisions shared openly. The land accepted the change. Sunset painted the hills gold. Children slept early, tired and happy. Elders prayed softly. The rancher and the Apache woman watched the fields. They knew this was only the second step. The road ahead remained long, but the ground beneath them was firm. Their bond grew rooted, not in words alone, but in action, and the West took notice. The third day opened with heat, rising early. The fields shimmered and insects sang. Work paused often for water and shade. The Apache woman organized rest with wisdom. The rancher followed her lead without pride. By midday, messengers arrived from the valley. They carried warnings of a coming drive. A cattle baron wanted the river bend. He claimed papers and power. Fear whispered through the camp. The rancher gathered the council. Voices spoke careful and honest. Some urged retreat. Others urged defense. The Apache woman listened, then spoke. She said land is defended by truth and unity. She said the river feeds all who protect it. The rancher agreed. They planned a path of law and peace. They would meet the baron openly. They would show work done and lives changed. Preparations filled the afternoon. Records, written marks counted. Fields, measured channels mapped. Children practiced songs of welcome. Elders prepared words of history. The land itself stood witness. Dust rose as riders appeared at sunset. The cattle baron arrived with guards. His eyes were cold and assessing. The rancher greeted him steady. He presented papers and invited inspection. The Apache woman stood tall beside him. She spoke of stewardship and care. The baron sneered at shared tables. He mocked the council, but he walked the fields. He saw water flow where dust once lay. He saw healthy hands and calm faces. Guards shifted uneasy. The baron demanded tribute. The rancher refused without anger. He offered fair purchase or shared lease. The Apache woman added terms of protection. The baron scoffed and threatened courts. The rancher nodded and welcomed the test. Night fell thick with tension. Fires burned brighter than fear. Songs carried resolve. Children slept with heads on laps. Elders told stories of standing firm. The baron left promising return. The council met again late. Plans were set for evidence and allies. Letters drafted, riders chosen. The Apache woman sent word to neighboring clans. The rancher sent word to fair dealers. Days followed with long rides and waiting. Heat pressed patience. Yet the fields grew greener. Harvest signs appeared early. Neighbors curious came to see. Some offered help quietly. Others brought trade openly. Community widened like a river. The baron returned with officials. Papers were examined under sun. Maps compared, testimonies heard. The council spoke as one. Truth stood steady. The officials ruled for shared rights. The river bend remained protected. Cheers rose restrained and grateful. The baron left smaller than before. Work resumed with renewed spirit. The Apache woman taught rotation and saving seed. The rancher invested tools and shelter. Education began under cottonwood shade. Children learned numbers and stars. Respect grew into routine. One evening a storm broke hard. Rain lashed and wind roared. Channels held firm. No flood came. The rancher laughed in relief. The Apache woman smiled proud. They walked the fields at dawn. Damage small, grow strong. Gratitude filled the air. The council celebrated with food and dance. No excess, only joy. The rancher felt changed. Not saved, but aligned. The Apache woman felt secure. Not hidden, but honored. They spoke privately of the future, of markets and seasons, of protecting children and elders. They agreed leadership must remain shared, power diluted by service. The West learned a lesson quietly. That peace can be defended. That cooperation feeds more mouths. That courage can be calm. The third step set their pace. Forward grounded, patient and strong. The season turned and the days shortened. Cool mornings carried the smell of harvest. Fields stood tall with grain bending heavy. Work began before sunrise. Hands moved with practiced rhythm. The Apache woman guided storage and sharing. The rancher organized transport and trade. Balance ruled their choices. No hoarding, no waste. Word spread beyond the valley. Travelers came seeking work and peace. The council grew careful and firm. They welcomed the willing. They turned away the violent. One evening a sickness arrived quietly. A child fell ill than another. Fear tried to return. The Apache woman acted fast. She separated tents and improved water care. The rancher rode for medicine and help. He returned with supplies and knowledge. Elders mixed herbs with care. Nurses tended without rest. The sickness slowed then stopped. The camp breathed again. Gratitude replaced dread. The council recorded lessons learned. Health became shared duty. As trade increased, temptation followed. A merchant tried to cheat weights. The rancher exposed the trick publicly. He returned fair value and banned deceit. Trust deepened. Winter approached with early frost. They prepared shelters and fuel. The Apache woman taught insulation with earth. The rancher built windbreaks and barns. Storms came hard and long. Snow fell thick and quiet. Food stores held steady. Spirits remained warm. During the longest night, the council gathered by fire. They spoke of grief and hope. Names of the lost were honored. Songs of the living lifted hearts. A distant threat lingered in rumors. Bands displaced by drought moved nearby. The Apache woman proposed aid with caution. The rancher agreed to talks. They met under open sky. Terms were set clear and kind. Help given in exchange for peace. Violence was refused. Some accepted and settled. Others moved on. No blood was spilled. Spring returned slow and green. Fields rested then woke. Planning resumed with fresh energy. Schools expanded. Crafts flourished. Music filled evenings. The rancher noticed children teaching children. The Apache woman noticed men listening more. Leadership shifted quietly. Service replaced command. One day a letter arrived sealed. It offered partnership from a distant market. Profit large, but terms harsh. The council debated long. The rancher advised caution. The Apache woman spoke of sovereignty. They declined the offer together. They chose slower growth. The land approved with steady yield. A bridge was built across the river. Safe crossing for all. Work completed without ceremony. Use became the praise. Neighbors once hostile now traded openly. Trust repaired plank by plank. The rancher and the Apache woman walked often, not as symbols, but as workers. They spoke of teaching successors, of stepping back in time, of letting the council stand alone. One evening, a fire threatened the West Ridge. Alarm rang. Everyone moved with practiced calm. Lines formed, buckets passed. Fire broke and died. Loss was small. Unity proved strong. The night ended with tired smiles. Stars shone sharp and close. The land rested again. The fourth step showed endurance. Through illness, cold, and fire, they had learned resilience. Not loud, not proud, but steady, rooted in care, and shared responsibility. The year leaned toward fullness, and the valley carried a quiet confidence. Fields no longer felt fragile, but lived in rhythm. People moved with purpose, learned over time. The council met less often because habits held strong. Problems were solved early with open talk. The Apache woman focused on teaching the young leaders. She walked with them through fields and river paths. She asked questions more than giving answers. The rancher did the same with new workers. He taught books, tools, and fairness. Mistakes became lessons, not punishments. One afternoon, a traveler arrived injured and tired. He carried news of distant conflict and hunger. The council gathered and listened carefully. Aid was offered with clear limits. Food, seed, and guidance were shared. The traveler left stronger than he arrived. Word of the valley spread again, not as rumor, but as example. People came seeking to learn not to take. Some stayed and committed. Others carried the methods home. Networks formed quietly. Trade routes softened borders. A drought touched the outer lands. The valley rationed early. No one starved. Planning proved its worth. The Apache woman led ceremonies of gratitude. The rancher supported without standing above. Faith took many forms, but respect held them together. Children grew into helpers and leaders. Elders rested, knowing knowledge continued. One evening, the council asked the rancher and the woman to speak of the beginning. They told the story simply, of listening first and acting together, of choosing the harder right. The people nodded because they lived it now. Later, the rancher walked alone by the river. He felt contentment without ownership. The land no longer needed his defense. It had many guardians. The Apache woman joined him quietly. They spoke of stepping back further, of trusting what they built. They agreed leadership should rotate. No one irreplaceable. A festival marked the harvest end. Music, food, laughter shared freely. No banners, no speeches. Just presence. As night deepened, fires glowed soft. The rancher looked around and felt peace. The Apache woman looked ahead and felt hope. They had not created perfection. They had created resilience. The West beyond still carried struggle, but seeds traveled farther than fear. The fifth step was humility, knowing when to guide and when to let go. The final season arrived without announcement. It came as a feeling more than a date. The valley moved easily now like a practice breath. Systems held even when tested. People trusted one another without watching hands. The council welcomed new voices as old ones rested. Rotation became natural. No throne, no spotlight. Service was the only measure. The Apache woman spent her days observing. She corrected gently when needed. She praised effort more than outcome. The rancher focused on teaching beyond the valley. He traveled to neighboring lands, sharing methods and mistakes alike. He returned lighter each time. The valley no longer depended on him. Children led projects with confidence. Water flowed where it was guided. Fields yielded without strain. Trade moved fair and open. One summer storm came sudden and fierce. Wind bent trees, rain struck hard. Channels held again. Roofs stood firm. When it passed, people checked on neighbors first. Loss was minimal. Care was immediate. The land answered with growth. Late one evening, the council gathered quietly. They asked the Apache woman to speak. She stood calm and grounded. She spoke of beginnings and endings, of strength that listens, of power that steps aside. She named the next stewards, men and women prepared by practice. The rancher then spoke briefly. He thanked the people for teaching him. He said he had learned belonging without owning. The council accepted their words. No ceremony followed, only shared work the next day. Weeks later, the Apache woman prepared to travel, not away but outward, to visit clans and teach again. The rancher chose to remain, to farm quietly and advise when asked. They walked together at dawn one last time. The river moved steady beside them. They spoke of pride without attachment, of love for a place that does not bind. They parted with an embrace of respect. Paths diverged without breaking. Years passed and the valley endured. Stories spread, carried by traders and teachers. Not myths, but methods. The West changed slowly. Conflict softened where cooperation grew. Children raised in the valley traveled far. They carried seeds and knowledge. They returned with ideas and friends. The land remained shared and protected. Names faded, but practices stayed. Travelers still asked about the beginning. Elders answered simply, by listening, by sharing, by standing together. The story did not end. It settled into daily life. Quiet, strong, and lasting, like roots beneath open ground.